We've had a couple of really awesome days these last couple of days, but today's not as nice as it was yesterday. I want to take you back to a day in January. It was probably the worst day for us to be on the road. And me, my son Micah, who attends Rowan BCC, and one of our senior engineers who's here today, went to Eastern Pennsylvania. It's actually in between Eastern Pennsylvania and New York, to visit a rubber molding company. And the reason we were there was because we needed to work on solving a problem. It was actually an opportunity to improve something that we were already doing. We provide a piece of equipment that is used in an aircraft carrier, and there was something that we could have done to actually improve it. And so the reason that we were at this facility was because we wanted to talk to the president and compounder at this company. For those of you who may or may not know, there's not a lot of rubber manufacturing companies here in the US anymore. A lot of them have moved to places like Taiwan and China and Korea and India. But we went to visit this company, and this gentleman that we were talking to is world-renowned in the area of rubber compounding. And as we sat down and talked to him and all of his expertise and his capacity and capability, I was reminded specifically to do with compounding. So let me explain what I mean by compounding. A compound is when you put a lot of ingredients together and make a special compound that can be used for a specific task. So in layman terms, that would be like a cookie batter, or a cake mix. And so that's the reason I was there. But as I was there, I was thinking about this particular event and what I would say today. And I had asked him to mold me 2 rubber balls. They're the size of ping pong balls, and I'm gonna bounce them. And as you can see, right, one laid flat and the other one came right up. In some strange way, these 2 balls represent success and failure to me. I'm going to park that for a second to come back to that, because we are here today to talk about Black History Month and to talk about the contributions that African Americans and people of African descent have made, the mark that they have left, continue to make, and will do so in the future, not only in the world, but right here in America. And before I start getting into it, there's a couple of people that I want to call out, because these are people who had tremendous impact right in my life. It's in 2007, I had lost an assignment that I had, and in February of 2007, sold the big home that we lived in, downsized. It was me, my wife, and 4 children, and I had started Part's Life. It was a very uncertain time. If you remember, 2007 and 2008, there was the whole meltdown going on. It was an incredibly difficult time to start a business. Companies like General Motors and Chrysler were already, begging for trouble, and if not for the federal government, they would not be here today. And as I was in this mode, frightened, not a lot of confidence, not so sure whether I was going to have enough money, not only to pay the mortgage, but to pay for medical insurance, because I had 3 sons who were playing Pop Warner football. And those of you who are around football, you know that it's very easy to get hurt. And so that was a constant battle. Which bill was I going to pay? And it was during this time I happened to be in church on a Wednesday night. And I was, all of this had started to get a hold of me, and I was weeping, crying, because I didn't know whether I was going to make it. I had lost my parents 25 years ago. I can tell you that I hadn't cried like that Wednesday night, because this time it was me, it was my wife, it was my children, and it was my responsibility. And I remember I'm sitting there sobbing, and I felt a hand just on me, and he's saying, "Son, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Just continue to trust God and continue to keep doing what you're doing. Everything's going to be fine." And that person who did that was an African-American gentleman by the name of Jim Kirby. Now, Jim Kirby has moved on. He's gone into the next life. But I have to tell you that, during a very difficult, dark time in my life, it was Jim Kirby who was there assuring me, giving me the confidence that I needed to keep taking the next step and the next step. So Jim's son, Billy, is here today. I'd invited him because, Jim's son, Billy, actually went to Annapolis, which is the #1 naval school in the world, became a naval career officer, and his brother works for the Homeland Security. And so just wanted to remember Jim Kirby. There was a second person, and that person was a gentleman by the name of Mike Scott. Mike Scott also passed away a few years ago. But Mike Scott was an engineer at Lockheed Martin. He started his career at RCA, and then it became Martin Marietta, and then Lockheed Martin. He would tell me that when he used to travel for Martin Marietta, there was a time when he couldn't even stay with the rest of his team, especially when they traveled in the South. And Mike was also somebody, this was the pivotal time, 2007, 2008. I had a small office, 200 square feet. Today, Parts Life has a couple of components in the Aegis weapon system. We're doing a lot of stuff. We are an integral part of the DoD today. But that day, at that time, it was me in this 200 square foot office. I still have that same desk as a memory of those days. And I remember Mike walking in, and I had a, that's Mike Scott, by the way, and that's Jim Kirby. I had a poem on the wall, something I had learned as a 12-year-old, written by a poet by the name of Rudyard Kipling. And the whole poem was, if you can keep your head when everybody else is losing theirs. And I thought that this was an incredible thing that motivated me. He reads it, and he says to me, Sam, if is not a statement of faith. I said, what do you mean, if it's not a statement of faith? He said, no, if is not a statement of faith. And I got pretty upset with him. Because I'm thinking to myself, man, I learned this when I was 12 years old. This is part of who I am. Who's this guy to tell me, But you know what? You ask the people who are around me today, I don't use the word if anymore. I say when. If is one of the things that he said. If is not a statement of faith. I'm going to tell you one more thing he taught me. I'm somebody who walks fast. I talk fast. I eat fast. And Mike would say to me, Sam, stop rushing. He would say, hurrying is a denial of confidence. I'm going to say that one more time. Hurrying is a denial of confidence. I'm here to tell you that I'm still learning that lesson. Going back to people of African descent and African Americans and the mark that they have left in the world today and also in America. They have done so in art and entertainment. They have done that in science, in family, in religion, in sports, in entrepreneurship and education, the rule of law. Every one of these domains, the African Americans and people of African descent have left their mark and continue to leave their mark. I want to talk about 3 of those people today. And yes, having grown up in Sri Lanka, by the way, I came here from Sri Lanka to go to a community college, not as big as this one in southern Michigan. And, of course, Muhammad Ali and Michael Jackson were huge people. In fact, this morning when I was working out to the music of Michael Jackson. But the person that I want to talk about is somebody who grew up 15 minutes away from here. I was a sprinter when I was a young boy, and I ran the 100, the 200, the 4x100, and the long jump. And that person was Carl Lewis. Carl Lewis grew up right here in Willingboro. And Willingboro is not only known for Carl Lewis, but there are many other world-class athletes football players, track stars that have come out of Willingboro. And they said about Carl Lewis when he was young that even his sister was faster than him. But this was a guy who wasn't going to be willing to allow that type of thing to define him. And they talk about the fact that he would actually run, they called it slow motion form running, which is what he perfected. To think about it, Carl Lewis had one of the best forms in track and field. He won 9 gold medals, took part in 4 different Olympics, and was an incredible person to the point where Sports Illustrated called him the athlete of the century, and so did the International Olympic Committee. So that's Carl Lewis, somebody who showed a lot of resiliency and resolve to be at the top of his game, in track and field. It's very difficult for us to talk about the contributions without also mentioning the name Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was a young man that grew up in South Africa during a time when South Africa was segregated, right? There was institutional racism, both politically and economically, to keep a people down. And that term that it was known was something called apartheid. It comes from the apartheid. It comes from the word being apart. It's a Dutch Afrikaan word, and it was meant to keep people apart. As a young person, as Nelson Mandela started to experience this with his people, he started to act violently in some ways against the government, and he ended up being put in prison. Very interesting, because in prison, he started to think about some things. He started to take note of his life. He said 3 things. He said, number 1, all is not lost. The second thing that he came up with was, is this part of a greater plan? The fact that I'm in prison, is this part of a greater plan? And the third thing he said was, if all is not lost, and if there is something more to this, if I'm part of a greater plan, then how should I live? How should I behave? And how should I speak? He ended up writing a letter every week and started to shape the way the world thought about this difficult thing, or not only difficult, but cruel and inhumane thing of apartheid. And because of his single-handed work, eventually, they broke from out of that. In 1993, he ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1994, he became the president of South Africa. And because of the way that prison had shaped him, think about that, 27 years he was in prison. That's more than the average age of most students who go to Rowan BCC, 27 years. But you know what? Prison had shaped this man, and he was extremely magnanimous in the way that he handled the people and the race that had treated him and his people that way. I think it's important to note that Nelson Mandela was somebody who showed that resiliency and resolve. The third person that I would like to bring up is a lady by the name of Katherine Johnson. Katherine Johnson was a school teacher, but she decided she wanted to do more than that. So she figured out a way to get into the Langley Space Center in Virginia and started to, just do menial things. But by doing menial things and not being willing to be kept down, she eventually became almost like a computer. Think about that. This was in the 1950s, where it was before computers, and she was starting to do calculations on the Apollo 11 and the Apollo 13. And this lady had a huge impact in the US winning the space race. Why do I bring that up? Today, in the Department of Defense seems to think that there is about a shortage of about 300,000 jobs that are related to STEM. And there is not enough young people who are going into this field. I'm at colleges pretty regularly because I have 3 sons in college right now, and I see a lot of Asian students, students from India, students from China. But guess what? None of these students can actually work in the Department of Defense. I would love to see a lot more young people, not from Bombay and Shanghai, but right here in Willingboro and Camden and Pennsauken and Cinnamonson and Moorestown, starting to get into STEM and starting to fill in the gap. We need it. It is an issue of national importance, just like it was in winning the space race. You thought I forgot about this ball, that's why I held on to it. This understanding, there's a term in rubber technology called rebound resilience. And what that is when you press something, how fast does it come back? It's also called short-term memory. And as I think about people, not only of African and African-American descent, but people all over the world who have created success and have started to achieve their God-given ability, there is this quality of being able to come back, right? When I used to do track, we would call it I think it was called the 4-point stance. It is what Carl Lewis did, right? It's being able to curl yourself back, being able to boom, when at the start of the gun. That's the property that I'm talking about, this understanding of resiliency, the understanding of coming back and not being able to stay down. And if you think about African people and African American people, these are people, you are people, who have shown this resiliency for the last 400 years. You owe it to people like Jim Kirby and Mike Scott and all of the people who have gone before you to be able to rise up and do those things that you need to do in order to continue to create success, whether it is STEM or art and education, whether it is sports, whether it is science. I don't care what the issue is. We need to be able to show that resiliency that was shown by a lot of these people. As I start to land this plane, I just want to bring up one more thing that I thought was extremely significant. I want to take you back to a story that I had learned in Sunday school. It was about a young boy named Zacchaeus. Is there anybody called Zacchaeus in the room? Okay, so I'm safe. I mean, think about it. How would you have wanted if your parents called you Zacchaeus? So that was his first strike, that he was called Zacchaeus. So we're going to call him Z. Number 2, they said, he was a small-made person. He was small in stature compared to everybody else that was around his day. And as Zacchaeus grew up, what do you think he did as he got older when it was time for him to pick where he was, what he was going to do for work? No, he didn't become a professional ball player. Neither did he join the nursing program at Rowan BCC so that he can help others and, be somebody who was really going to make his life count. No, he became a tax collector. A tax collector? It's almost as bad as the people who write your parking tickets, right, when you park in the wrong place. Or in Philadelphia, right, parking authority, right? You see those people? That's the kind of person that Zacchaeus was. And while he was doing this, he hears, so 3 strikes, right? In baseball, 3 strikes and you're out. His name, he was small-made, and then number 3, he chooses a profession that people absolutely can't stand. So he starts to hear that in the next town over, that Jesus is coming along to his town. And this was a time very similar. As I was thinking about this, it's very similar to the time in Philadelphia, right? 2 weeks ago, right, we had the Philadelphia Eagles parade. The Philadelphia people were tired of, living under the shadow of the giants and the cowboys and the redskins. I mean, we talked about everybody else other than for the eagles. It was that type of time that the people of that day were experiencing. And when they heard that Jesus was coming, the way he spoke, the authenticity and the transparency with how he spoke was starting to endear people to Jesus. And Zacchaeus heard it, and he said, you know what? I am going to figure out a way to meet Jesus. So what does he do? Think about the Eagles Parade, right? People were there, grandparents, parents, cousins, uncles, aunties, right? They were all going to be there. And because Z was not a very popular guy, there was nobody who was going to keep a seat for him there. So what does he decide to do? He says, you know what? I'm going to figure out a way to see Jesus. And so what does he do? The Bible says that he climbs a tree. He climbs a tree so that he can have a place where he can actually start to see how things were happening at that time. So here's a man who, at the right time, showed resiliency and resolve to be able to put himself in a situation where his next opportunity was going to come from. We're not done yet. Jesus comes by, and he's walking. If he was by the way, before I forget, Zacchaeus also had put together a little bag for lunch. He had a couple of pretzels and some mustard. He was ready to go. He was going to be there because he was going to do this thing. Jesus walks by. He could have gone to Jeffrey Lurie's house. Think about that. If he was at the Eagles, he could have gone to Nick Folser's house. He could have gone to Carson Wentz's house and said, hey, buddy, how's your leg? Let me heal you so that you'll be back for spring training, right? That's not what Jesus chose to do. He stopped and talked to Zacchaeus. And he said, Zacchaeus, I want to meet you. I want to come to your house today. And that turned Zacchaeus' life. So for those of us who are here, who are like Zacchaeus, who are waiting for that next opportunity, remember the rebound resilience, the ability to come back, the short-term memory that you need, not to allow the adversity. Because I don't care what the color of your skin, I don't care what ethnicity, I don't care how old you are. Guess what? Adversity is something that's going to come your way. And the way you deal with it is probably the most important thing. But I'm not done. For those of us who are here, presidents of companies, business leaders, pastors, teachers, people of resources, professors, presidents, board trustees, I think there is a lesson for us to learn that Jesus taught. And that is, there are Zacchaeuses in our classroom. There are Zacchaeuses in our circle of influence. And it is our responsibility to be able to reach out and be able to start to engage those people that have been put in our path so that they can also reach their God-given ability. My parents used to say, to whom much is given, much is also required. Hey, I want to shout out to a couple of people today. My wife, Danilyn, is here, and my son, Micah. I have a lot of friends here. I want to say thank you to Ann for being here. Ann is a special friend of Mike Scott, and also Billy Kirby, who is Jim's son. There's a lot of other people here that I know. Thank you for being here. Dr. Tate, thank you for inviting me to be here. I would love to answer questions.
So, sorry, the mic is not working. Hi. Okay. So, you're not done yet. We want to make sure that if you have any questions, Sam is going to open it up so that you can feel free to ask him whatever questions that you have on your mind.
I'd like to
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the question is, times in my life that I have been resilient. I think the year 2007, when I was starting a company, was a very, very difficult time for me and my family, right? Because I was the primary breadwinner, as I told you, no mortgage, medical insurance, and having to try to navigate that, I thought was a very, very difficult time in my life, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot about who I am, learned a lot about God's faithfulness, learned a lot about, when you're not knowing, when you don't know what to do, how to put one foot in front of the other and keep executing until, the thing happens. So I would say that 2007 and 8 was a very, very difficult, challenging time where I was able to put some of what I'm talking about to work. Anybody else? Yes, Billy.
Sam, thank you so much. Question I have for you is, during your times of adversity, what was the term that you coined with the ball? What was it called? That resiliency was called again?
Rebound resiliency.
Rebound resiliency.
Uh-huh.
What was the source of your rebound resiliency? What did you lean on in these times?
I would say my faith, primarily, my faith, my upbringing, my faith in God, number one, and then my upbringing by my parents. I was brought up as a Christian, and I knew that, that God always had a plan. So, if you look at what I'm saying here, is to achieve my God-given potential, right? So, if God has created some potential in me, in some ways, it's also His responsibility to get me there. Part of what I need to do is to be able to cooperate with Him, right? So I would say the single ingredient for me is my faith in God. And then, a supportive family, right? Because, I remember going to my wife and saying, hey, how am I going to do this and how are we going to do this? And she said to me, listen, you want to do this, I am 110% behind you, but we got to sell our home. We had a big home, and we need to sell the home and downsize. So there were some practical things, too, that I had to do. So yes, faith in God, but then thereafter, doing the next step, the practical things that one has to do in order to get to that next step. So did I answer your question, Billy?
Sure did.
Thank you. Yes, Evan.
So, you always seem very entrepreneurial to me. What would you say to people who aren't entrepreneurial but want to become that?
I would say you have to show a lot of initiative. I wrote a book, and the first chapter that I talk about is the word initiative. People who are entrepreneurial are not waiting to be asked or to be told to do something, right? This morning when we were parking the car, there was a piece of, there was somebody's coffee cup there. I picked it up. I practiced this. I not only did that because, it was the right thing to do, but I do that to continue to remind myself that I got to do these things automatically, right? So for me, the initiative is the most important thing. And then after initiative, you got to execute, meaning, staying at home and being in bed doesn't get it done. Or just going to work and doing the same thing doesn't get it done. You got to get around, people who are going to motivate you, who are going to, take you into that next moment. Zacchaeus was a great example, right? He didn't allow all that stuff that was going on to keep him from putting himself in that place, and I'm sure that, Zacchaeus, was a changed man after he met Christ. But the truth of the matter is, you've got to be somebody who's showing initiative, and then you've got to be able to go out and do some stuff and become valuable to somebody else, because people are always looking for somebody to make a difference. So if you're waiting to be asked, that's probably not the best way to go about it. You got to get out there and put yourself out there. Yes, sir. What does Parts Life do? So we are a company that makes, we provide solutions for very expensive assets. So the Aegis weapon system that's made right here in Morristown is a system. It's a defensive mechanism that is used on an aircraft carrier, or actually on a destroyer. And and it's a very, very multi-billion-dollar system, right? But even multi-billion-dollar systems sometimes need small components that nobody is able to supply. And so Parts Life steps in there, we do the reverse engineering, and I call it the one throat to choke. You know, we are the accountable person, single point of failure, right? When you deal with Parts Life, we don't do this. Not this person's fault, we take responsibility and deliver that product for the life of the asset. So we do that on the Aegis weapon system, we are on many other critical systems. And even though my background is in automotive, most of our work right now is in the Department of Defense. And you've heard recently how the budget was passed, and the military is going to be buying a lot of new aircrafts, a lot of new stuff, right? But a lot of that new stuff is not going to be delivered in the next 8 years. It's going to take, it takes probably 8 to 10 years to create and to make an aircraft carrier. So there's a lot of current systems that continue to need to be, where their life has to be extended. So what we do is to find places where nobody else can make those parts, and we figure out a way to be able to do that. Anything else? Anybody else? Going once? I
No
can't
other
see.
questions for Sam? Anyone?
That's good.
Well, please, let's give Sam
Thank you.
another round of applause.